Good evening, I'm Ryan Doyle in for Ezra tonight. When you think about the word prison, what do you envision? Big steel bars, dank cells, an uninviting institution that strips you of your freedoms for your wrongdoing? Or are you one of those people that believes prison should be more like the cushy conditions of the television series Orange is the New Black? In this setup, female inmates sit around gabbing about their lives while getting their hair done at the prison salon. To me, prison should never be easy. After all, its main goal should be to deter people from ever wanting to return. However, there are some who believe that making an inmate's time in the slammer more like home will automatically lead them on a path to rehabilitation. Among them, the lead author of a new study out of Vancouver. His study says that needle exchange programs are essential to curb infection rates among inmates. Now, this assumes prison guards and the system itself acknowledge that cons are doing drugs behind bars. And with this knowledge, instead of cracking down on the behavior, they would help facilitate the problem, essentially aiding convicted criminals in breaking the law behind bars. The author even goes as far as to suggest supervised injections, meaning the prison staff would be paid to stand around and watch inmates shoot up illegal drugs. And this is a serious solution? These institutions where we have control and where drugs aren't supposed to exist. Tell me, how is a prisoner supposed to rehabilitate and get their life together when they are high on state-administered drugs? The soft-on-crime community has a strange view of compassion and an even stranger view of deterrence. This is the same attitude behind this week's BC Supreme Court decision that ruled imprisoned mothers have the constitutional right to care for their newborn babies. The decision comes from a lawsuit brought by two former inmates on behalf of all women incarcerated in the province. The suit centered around a program for mothers of newborn babies at the Alouette Correctional Center for Women in Maple Ridge that was canceled by the BC government in 2008. The court ruled the BC government decision to cancel a correctional program for the mothers of newborns was unconstitutional because it would separate moms and babies during a critical bonding period. Isn't that a precious image? Mother and child sitting behind the prison walls, sharing personal time, while the other inmates are getting high next door in the safe injection room. There are a lot of questions this ruling brings forward as well. Do we want prison guards playing the role of daycare worker, running around after inmates and their offspring? On top of that, is a prison a safe place for a child to be raised in? One inmate that was part of the court case claimed that 2 days after she gave birth to her daughter, a social worker took the child away. She was serving a prison sentence for dealing drugs. It was devastating. It was the saddest day of my life, she said, which tells me all I need to know about the system we have in front of us. The inmates are never to blame. They are never viewed as the authors of their own fate, but rather as victims of an uncaring society. Thankfully, some levels of government understand that if prisons are made to be too cozy, then no one will fear going there. Take the federal Conservatives back in 2006. They put the brakes on prison tattoo parlors, a $600,000 liberal pet project that made sure all inmates could get the latest ink at a cost to you, the taxpayer. That is the thinking we need to prevail here. We need government that understands prisons shouldn't be packed with perks, and part of the consequences of prison is you don't get the luxuries of home. And you might lose things and people you love, even your newborn child. More consequences, less creature comforts. It may sound like a hardline approach, but really it is the most compassionate thing we can do for our convicts. Oh, the cold world of prisons. Not so cold here in Canada, at least in some provinces. Crime expert Ross McLean joins me to talk a little bit about this. Ross, it seems like the same old, same old. You've got province after province that wants to coddle the criminal and the convict as opposed to teaching him a long, hard lesson about it's not okay or comfortable to be in prison.
That seems to be the way it's going, Ryan. I mean, I'm constantly amazed the fact that we have got federal laws by the federal government. We decide they're going to be enforced provincially, and we have these provincial corrections places making different decisions, like giving tattoo parlors to people, and we can look after your kids in prison, and we can do. There's something that's gone a little bit snaky there.
Let me talk to you about the drugs, because, you know, I've heard from people, it seems even ludicrous to have the argument that you should be giving people in prison safe needles to use. Where do the drugs come from? I mean, how are these inmates getting access to drugs to even do and put in the needles in the first place?
Drugs get smuggled in. They get smuggled in by visitors. They get smuggled in sometimes by corrections officers. They will have tricks where they'll have people, they'll put them in a catapult and they'll fire them over the yard to land someplace where somebody can get them. You know, the point being, though, that with the newer prisons, and I was in one of the newest state-of-the-art prisons not too long ago.
As a guest.
As a guest. Thank you very much. They just opened. It was $600 million to open this. They have done some really thoughtful work to make sure that they're going to be able to stop these problems by stopping the prisoners having to move all around the prison all the time. That's when the drugs get passed and things happen. So it's going to be a lot tighter in the new prisons, Ryan.
Now, I know as a former police officer, you're no stranger to people who have done their time and then they go right back in. It's a bit of a revolving door. Does that speak to the fact that these criminals out on the streets just don't fear the system?
Well, there's something... I'm not sure if it's fear of the system. I mean, one of the issues when they get in, they get treated, or people are trying to treat them and coddle them a little bit, but they only do 2/3 of their sentence. I mean, that's automatic. Then they're out for parole. So, I mean, the government has brought in some truth in sentencing, so at least the public gets a better idea of how long they're going in for. But when they're going in, what are some of these judges? This provincial judge in BC who's just found a new federal charter right to have your children in prison with you. I mean, I'm sure they're going to appeal that. That's not going to stand up. That makes no sense for doing that.
I mean, think of the baby in this circumstance. I mean, I don't want to sound like a bleeding heart here, you know, think about the children. But in this circumstance, I think most level-headed people understand that it's not okay to raise a baby inside the walls of a prison. You should have thought of that before you were dealing the drugs in the first place.
When you're committing crimes on the outside, children's services will come and take your children away from you. So what are they going to do? You commit the crime, they take them away, oh, you're in prison now, we'll bring them back to you. That just doesn't make any sense. The balance needs to be right where prison needs to serve, in my mind, at least 3 objectives. One is punishment for what you've done. Second is rehabilitation for those who deserve and are open to rehabilitation and can be. And third is protecting society by keeping people locked up who are just going to be dangerous on the outside regardless.
Well, and I think when you talk about rehabilitation, as I mentioned in the introduction today, you can't have rehabilitation of people that are high. If you're stoned, if you're doing heroin or what have you, behind the prison walls, that makes that rehab all the more tough.
Well, here's the 3 things that cause the HIV problems, which is, that's who wrote this study. I mean, they've got a dog in this race, right?
Sure.
They're a group who looks after this problem. The 3 things that cause it the most are unprotected sex in prison, tattoos, prison tattoos, and sharing drug needles. Well, they did some tries there a little while ago where they started giving out free condoms to some of the prisoners. I mean, that's great if you're on the wrong receiving end of that, isn't it? That they're giving out to facilitate prisoner rapes in some cases. But what they found was the prisoners wouldn't take them because they didn't want to be identified as someone who's being sexually active in prison, because then the guards would deal with them.
Sure.
Well, guess what? If Joey in cell number 476 is always coming to me for free needles, I'm going to be watching him a little bit closer to see where he's getting the stuff from that goes in those needles. So some of these programs, they might sound like they'll work. In reality, they won't work. And let me tell you, prison guards are scared of this sort of talk. They're scared to death of it because they're the ones who are on the receiving ends of some of these bodily fluids. And they've asked to have legislation where these prisoners have to declare if they're HIV or not. They don't have to do that.
That's a great point. You have to think about the guards in this circumstance as well. We'll obviously watch this story as it transpires. We appreciate it.
Let's keep an eye on what's going on in our prisons, and it's good for this show for doing it, Ryan.